Greetings from West Thumb Geyser Basin, which is the subject of today's virtual Yellowstone tour. Incidentally, one of the interesting things about West Thumb is that there is so often an elk herd to be seen in this area, and if you look under that tree, you can see a cow elk taking shelter in the shade. On the day that I shot this virtual Yellowstone tour, it was so windy that the noise was often too loud for my narration, and you couldn't hear my narration at all. This is why we have two versions of this virtual Yellowstone tour at West Thumb. This one we deleted the original audio so you wouldn't have to deal with the wind noise, and I'm doing a subsequent voiceover. And with the other one, the original audio is still in place and you can hear most of it, but at times the wind is just a little loud. West Thumb Geyser Basin is located right on the shores of the incredibly blue Yellowstone Lake. To get a better idea of where it is situated relative to the rest of Yellowstone National Park, please go to the following of our sites where you can see a map of the park. That is yellowstonetours.net/map, yellowstonetours.net/map, and I'll drop in a copy of the map right here. As you might have recognized from the map, West Thumb Geyser Basin is located right at the very southern tip of Yellowstone's lower loop. If you're driving, for example, from Old Faithful heading in a general south-southeasterly direction, you'll come across West Thumb at the point where you could turn left on the Grand Loop Road to head towards Fishing Bridge, or alternatively continue straight to head off down across the Rockefeller Parkway and then into Grand Teton and onto Jackson Hole. Alternatively, coming up from Jackson, you'd pass through Grand Teton and then go over the Rockefeller Parkway into Yellowstone South entrance, and just where you could turn right to go to Fishing Bridge or continue on straight towards Old Faithful and the Upper Geyser Basin, that's where you'll see West Thumb Geyser Basin on your right. West Thumb is not anywhere near as popular as the other main geyser basins in Yellowstone, and just look at that beautiful pool. And I could never really understand why, perhaps because it's located a little bit further away from the other main geyser basins, from the lower geyser basin, the midway geyser basin, and the upper geyser basin. But without a shadow of doubt, West Thumb is my favorite geyser basin. Just look at the water of the lake in the background. And if you come in the spring or the fall, those mountains on the other side of the lake are covered in snow. This West Thumb area used to be the site of a large campground. There were cabins, there was a cafeteria, there was a photo shop, there was also a gas station. But for reasons that I never can really understand, the Park Service decided to get rid of all that sometime in the 1980s. If you have a look ahead of us now, you can see the white area that I've mentioned before that you always see at thermal areas. And this is called sinter, and this is a mineral that gets brought up from underground by the geysers and the hot springs. So when you see the white area or the pale area, you know that you're in a thermal area, or you're in an area perhaps where thermal features used to be. Just ahead of us now, obviously that is Yellowstone Lake, but if we were to turn a little to the right, this is where the steamship called Zillar, this is where the steamship used to pick people up. In the old days, visitors to West Thumb used to arrive by means of, and just look at how blue that water is. You think you're in a tropical island. Visitors used to arrive at the Old Faithful area by a bumpy, dusty old stagecoach coming in from Old Faithful. And I think if we look closely in the background there, you can see a couple of guys on their kayaks. So people used to come to the West Thumb area from Old Faithful in an old stagecoach, and then they had a choice. They could either continue in the stagecoach across, once again, a very bumpy, somewhat decrepit old road, onto the hotel that was to be found at what's called the Lake area, and there's still a wonderful hotel there today, or they could hop in the steamship and do it in much more comfort. West Thumb, as we see, not only has lots of hot pools, lots of hot springs, but on the right-hand side now, just after where you can see those bacteria mats, you'll see there are actually some geysers under the water. Now, the geysers didn't always used to be under the water. And something else about this area, look at these really cool, small thermal features. Look at the one on the right, the one that I've just gone over. See how beautifully clear and gray and blue it was, and obviously so hot. Now, coming up on the right there, you can see where there are a couple of geysers. The geysers, as I think I mentioned before, were not always underwater. The water of Yellowstone Lake the water level has increased over the years. And as the water level has risen, so the geysers have gone underwater. Now, coming up next is something that is really cool. And this is Fishing Cone Geyser. The name Fishing Cone came about supposedly because there was a guy fishing at Fishing Cone one day. He caught a fish and accidentally flipped it into the top of the geyser. The fish then came out cooked. And this is supposed to be a true story, and then it happened many times subsequently. In fact, this became a major tourist attraction, just like Handkerchief Pool, for example, at Black Sand Basin. People would come, tourists would come from all over the place, and what you would do is you would take a fish and put it in the boiling hot waters of Fishing Cone Geyser, which you can see over there, and your fish would then come out cooked. And the park superintendent, who I've mentioned before, Philetus Norris, who was the superintendent at the end of the 1870s and early 1880s, used to demonstrate this to visitors and to tourists. He'd show how you could take a fish and put it in Fishing Cone Geyser, and it would come out cooked. In fact, there were even stories about members of Congress who were supposedly hooting as their colleagues described this whole process. And just as washing your handkerchief in Handkerchief Pool at Black Sand Basin was banned, so fishing at Fishing Cone was also banned. Fishing Cone is actually a geyser, although it hasn't erupted for quite some time. It used to erupt to a height of about 40 feet, but that was all the way back in 1919. And there was actually a fisherman who was badly burnt when Fishing Cone Geyser erupted in the early 1920s. Off to our right, as we've seen, is Yellowstone Lake, which, amongst other things, is the largest body of water in Yellowstone National Park. It's also the largest alpine lake in North America. In other words, the largest lake in North America that is located at altitude, and I believe that it is the second largest alpine lake in the world. We can see the bacteria mats there coming off what's called Black Pool, and I've described what happens here before. In those very, very hot springs, there are very few organisms that are able to live. But as you get closer to the edges and as the water starts to run away, so more bacteria is able to survive in the environment. And that's where the bacteria mats come from, comprised of what's called thermophiles or heat-loving bacteria. This pool, as I mentioned a moment ago, is called black pool. And I don't know why it's called black pool when it's got that beautifully blue color. You'll see if you ever do visit that you can look down in that pool and just basically see forever. It is so translucent and so clear. You do get a bit of an idea about that. Anyway, to get back to Yellowstone Lake, in winter, the lake is actually covered in ice. Just about 3 feet of ice covers almost the entire lake, except where there are hot springs in shallow waters. If you're lucky enough to be in Yellowstone just after the Crade Pass Road opens, and that's the road between Old Faithful and West Thumb. It's one of the last roads in Yellowstone to open in the spring because it is so high. And this over here is Abyss Pool. I've always felt that Abyss Pool should perhaps be called Black Pool because it certainly seems when you're there in person to be a lot more black than Black Pool itself. Anyway, I was telling you about the ice. If you're lucky enough to come to Yellowstone in the spring, just after Crade Pass between Old Faithful and West Thumb has opened, you'll often see ice all over Yellowstone Lake. Incidentally, you'll also see it on Yellowstone Lake, on Lewis Lake, which is to the south of West Thumb on the road down to the south entrance. You'll go past Lewis Lake, which in the early spring is iced up, and then the Lewis River and Lewis Falls, and then Lewis Canyon, which is all really spectacular on the way down to the south entrance. The reason I was pointing the camera at those trees is it's not unusual for us to see elk lurking there, so do be careful. Elk look very benign and tame, but they can be pretty dangerous, especially when you come across a cow elk and it has a calf with it. What happens is they can get up on their back feet and use their front feet as baseball bats, and they can inflict some pretty serious damage to you. As you've seen, there is a boardwalk system that runs around the entirety of West Thumb. I've done it today in a counter or anti-clockwise direction, but it's possible to do it in either direction. So you can go around the boardwalks that start at the top and then go all around Yellowstone Lake, and this that we're about to take here is a path that leads off the main boardwalk trail and basically cuts across the circular shape. There's some very interesting hot springs in this area as well, although when you look at them you wonder just how alive they are. The one that I pointed out perhaps 30 or 45 seconds ago certainly looks like it's no longer active. What happens is that for a variety of reasons, one of them being earthquakes and the other one being clogged plumbing, these hot springs no longer at times get the source of intense heat that they need in order to be able to survive. If, as in the old days, people would throw things inside the hot springs or inside the geyser, if you just throw a little pebble in or a coin, the sinter, the white stuff that you see over there, adheres to what you throw in, and it grows very, very rapidly. And what happens is that because these rocks and these coins and these pebbles grow, so the plumbing then starts to get blocked up. And as the plumbing gets blocked up, so the source of heat is not able to come up anymore, and the pool starts cooling down. Like that pool we just saw is obviously really, really hot. You don't see any other colors in it. Morning Glory, which you can see right at the far end of the trail that runs from Old Faithful down to Morning Glory in the Upper Geyser Basin, is the best example of a magnificently colored hot spring that looks so beautiful because it is dying. Its plumbing has got clogged up. There's no longer the source of heat coming up to the surface the way that there used to be, and because of that, more and more living organisms, more and more bacteria, are able to live in the hot spring. We look at that one over there. You can see how blue it is, and there's not even colors right on the very edges of it. So it would appear to be a very, very hot spring. Same with this one over here. And it's always really cool when you can see the water bubbling. The reason I'm showing that is those of you who've seen our other virtual Yellowstone tours of the of the Lower Geyser Basin and the Midway Geyser Basin will have heard me say, and also Firehole Lake Drive, will have heard me say the ground around these hot springs is potentially very, very thin, and that's why the Park Service has got these boardwalk systems in place. If you step off the boardwalks, you don't know just how thin the ground potentially can be. Look at it crumbling away there on the left top side of that hot spring. We also, when we look at that hot spring, we see the blues and greens in the middle, but then as you come to the edges, you can see the browns and the warmer colors, and that's clearly an indication that the hot spring, that the water is getting cooler as it reaches the edges, and more bacteria are able to survive in it. We're now continuing on the boardwalk, and pretty soon we're going to join the main trail again. You'll recall I mentioned that I had got off the main trail to cut across the middle, and we're about to join the main trail again. West Thumb Geyser Basin has got all four of Yellowstone's thermal features, although depending on the time of the year, you may not see all of them. When I was filming this, which was towards the beginning of July, there was still a lot of moisture around, so the mud pots weren't really as mud potty, if you like. Here we're looking at that elk again. You'll recall when we came in, we saw it. So the mud pots aren't really as dry as they might be later in the season. We see this particularly, you may recall, at the Lower Geyser Basin, right next to the paint pots, where depending on the time of the year, the paint pots and the fumaroles could either be paint pots, fumaroles, or hot springs. It all really depends on just how much water there is around. Well, unfortunately, once again, I'm getting to the end of another one of our virtual Yellowstone tours. I'd hoped to talk more about Yellowstone Lake and the fishing issues there, but we'll have to leave that for another one of our virtual Yellowstone tours. Thank you for joining me on this tour. If you enjoy our virtual Yellowstone tours, please consider giving us a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel. Otherwise, see you in Yellowstone.